This evening we're going to be looking at the words written in Romans. But before we do that, that would be Romans chapter 1. Before we do that, let's go to Luke chapter 12. I want us to look at the words that Jesus says, Luke chapter 12, beginning in verse 9. Well, actually, in verse 8, sorry. So Luke 12, verse 8. Also I say to you, whoever confesses me before men, him the Son of Man will also confess before the angels of God. But he who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. So in confessing Christ, he will confess you before the angels of God. It also before God himself. But if anyone denies Christ, he will be denied before God and before those angels. Now, let's go to Romans chapter 1. Romans 1, Paul writes some very, very powerful words here at the beginning of Romans. And Romans 1 in verse 16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. For it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek. Now we go to verse 17 as well. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Now we're going to look at these two verses this evening. We mentioned that of Luke chapter 12, verses 8 and 9, of confessing Christ or denying Christ. Now, we're looking at what Paul is stating here of that he's not ashamed of the cross, which means he's not ashamed of Christ. He's not ashamed of the gospel. He's not ashamed of anything that's presented here. He's not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. But notice some things. Let's go to Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3, this is what Paul says concerning himself. That in verse, we'll just begin in verse 4. Philippians 3, verse 4. Though I also might have confidence in the flesh, if anyone else thinks he may have confidence in the flesh, I more so. Verse 5, circumcised on the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, concerning the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. But what things were gained to me, these I have counted loss for Christ. Yet, indeed, I also count all things lost for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them as rubbish, that I may gain Christ. Now, notice what Paul gave up, because Paul did give up something. He did give up something. You know, there's some people, you can say they have nothing to lose. Well, they do. But Paul had things to lose. He had things to lose, and he did lose them. But he counted all those things as rubbish. Absolute rubbish, because they have no bearing whatsoever on his soul, or at least the salvation of his soul. Nothing at all. And he is willing to give these things up. What he had, while he was working for the Sanhedrin court, what he had was a good position, a place of prestige, a place of honor, and a place there in society. He had himself a place, and he could have presumably in time been on that Sanhedrin court. Presumably, you don't know. You don't know. But he had a lot. And the things that he could brag about, the things that he could boast of, those are things that he just tossed away entirely. Now, when he talks about boasting of these things, when it came to that society in Jerusalem, when it came there, those were things to boast of. Outside of that, it's like, well, yeah, what's the big deal? But that's the way it is. With each culture, there are things that one can boast of. And here, to boast that he is an Israelite, he is a Pharisee, he is of the tribe of Benjamin, he was circumcised on the 8th day. All these things given to him, had a zeal for persecuting the church. He was blameless in the law. That is the law of Moses. He was blameless there. But he was willing to give all those things away. And he goes from that highly respected man and a pawn of the Sanhedrin court, being used by them, to now being hated by them. He would have had plenty of friends, plenty of acquaintances in Jerusalem and in Jewish society that would have turned on him in an instant, and did, no doubt. That they would praise him one second, be confused about him the next, and then want him dead after that. And there was one place that Paul could not go to and expect that he could stay there for any length of time. And Jerusalem was it. He could never return back to Jerusalem and there not be some kind of ruckus over him. They could live with Peter and Andrew and John. They could live with them. They could live with Matthew, the tax collector. They could live with these others. These others that they didn't cause them as much concern or as much hatred as Paul did, because Paul was one of them. Matthew, a tax collector, he was on the fringes anyway. Bunch of fishermen, they're ignorant anyway. But Paul was one of them. He was one of them. And he gave it all away. He counts it as rubbish. And you know what? They would have known that. You don't just throw this away. But he did. Why did he throw it away? For the sake of Christ. Now when he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, it's true. He's not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And when he went to other cities, not just Jerusalem, when he went to other cities, let's just say Philippi or Ephesus or Corinth or Lystra or these other places, or Rome itself, when he went there, understand there would be Jews there that would accept him pretty readily, accept him as who he is, all right, that he's a Jewish man. He was educated in Jerusalem. Okay, that holds some value to them. But when he starts speaking of Jesus of Nazareth as the Christ, now some of them are going to believe, some of them are not going to believe. Okay, but with the Jews, at least, they will accept him in as one of their own until they decide, we don't like the message of Christ that you're bringing. We don't like that message. Now with the Gentiles, he's a complete outsider. Pretty much, he's an outsider. Now he was raised in Tarsus, which is a Gentile city. So he would have known the ways and the customs and things and expectations of certain Gentile places. But, you know, coming in here, he's already an alien. He's not one of us. That's a Jewish man who's coming here. And now he's also bringing something that is entirely new and talking about a Son of God coming down and dying by Roman execution. Okay. Let's go to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Now Paul says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. But there are people who are ashamed of it. They are ashamed of it. And Paul addresses that in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, beginning in verse 18. For the message of the cross is what? Foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. There's something about the message of the cross to some where it is foolishness, that we are saved by the death of the Son of God. They stumbled on that point. There would be those who would ask the question, why does God care about us anyway? Why would he send his Son here to die on the cross at all? Why did that even have to be done? There would be others that would say a Son of God could never be killed. And they would envision a Son of God as some kind of hero that can slay giants and dragons and valiant in battle and all that. That's their imagery of a Son of God. someone brilliant, someone undefeatable, and he is, but isn't being crucified by the Romans. Would never be. Now to the Jews, there was that stumbling block, because that wasn't the Messiah they had imagined or that they wanted. That's the Messiah that God gave us, the Messiah that He promised us. But let's continue on. Verse 19, for it is written. Now, verse 18, he says, message of the cross is foolishness, those who are perishing. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise. I will bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Those who think themselves extremely wise, He brings that to nothing. Those that consider themselves prudent, He brings that to nothing. They think they're wise. They think they're prudent. They think they have things figured out, and they don't. They just are impressed by themselves, impressed by their own wisdom, impressed by the way that they can think things through, but thinking things through doesn't make it real. And it doesn't make it that that's the way God has to do something. God does things the way He's going to do it. And He doesn't ask any wise man his advice. Verse 20, where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? And the answer to that is, yes, He has. Yes, He has. The wise in Jerusalem, He made them foolish. The wise among the lawyers, He made them foolish. The wise among the Gentiles, He made them foolish. So who doesn't He make foolish? Well, the fact of the matter is, God loves all mankind. There's a message for the wise, just come down off your high horse. There's a message for the wise, stop being so arrogant. There's a message for the wise that's for them too. But it's the humble who are going to take it immediately. It's the humble, it's the meek, it's the ones that have an honest heart. They're going to take it pretty quick, and others going in their own time. And that would include people like a Saul of Tarsus, who once they received the information and done their grieving, come to God. Now, we go to the next line there in Romans chapter 1 and verse 16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes. Let's go to the book of Micah. Micah chapter 7. Micah 7, and beginning in verse 18, we see this. Who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity and passing over the transgression of the remnant of His heritage? He does not retain His anger forever, because He delights in mercy. Here is the power of God to salvation to everyone who believes. We bring this to, because He delights in mercy, He would have to delight in mercy. He would have to do that if He offers salvation to everyone who believes. And as He's going to say, it's to the Jews first, but also to the Greek. It's Jew and Gentile. It's going to be offered to the Jew first. Well, why them first? Okay, it's got to go to somebody first. And God chose the line of Abraham first, because that's where the Christ was going to be born. Someone has to be first, and then the rest of us next. It's got to start somewhere. We'll get to that in just a second. But the power of God to salvation for everyone. It's not just for the Jews. It's for everyone who believes, which means that anyone who does not believe cannot be saved. It's that simple. God is no respecter of persons. No respecter of persons. Someone who can have the right genealogy, just a direct descendant from Abraham. someone who has all the everything right about them, one might say, but still does not believe, cannot be saved. Cannot be, regardless if they're Jew or Gentile. They cannot be saved. But that brings us to that next line in this, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. In Acts chapter 1 and verse 10, Jesus speaks to the apostles of the spread of the gospel and the spread of the church. When he speaks to them, he's about to ascend into heaven. He's already been crucified. He died. He was put in the tomb, and he came out of the tomb. Sunday morning, he's resurrected. Now, this is just before he ascends into heaven. He tells them of how the church is going to spread. And what he tells them actually is not only the plan in which this is the way it's to be done, but also telling them this is how it's going to take place. Not how it should take place, but this is actually how it's going to take place, and it is prophecy. Start in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the othermost parts of the world. That's how it's going to start. It's got to start somewhere, and it starts in Jerusalem. Well, if it starts in Jerusalem, that means the Jews are first. But if it goes to Judea, okay, you're still talking about Jews, but if it goes to Samaria, well, you're not talking about Jews anymore. You're talking about those that, yeah, they have a background, a claim of a background, but then to the uttermost parts of the world, that's the rest of us. That's everybody. It doesn't just stop in that region. It goes out. And when Jesus says that, he is saying it is starting in Jerusalem, just as Paul writes to the Jews first. They were the first audience. It has to start somewhere. God could have chosen the Incas if he wanted to. He could have chosen the Spaniards if he wanted to. He could have chosen the Chinese or the Koreans or whomever if he wanted to. But he chose the Jews first. And it should come as no surprise because we right now are in studying the book of Genesis, and you have the separation, the beginning of the separation of that Jewish nation with just two people, Abraham and Sarah. Just two people is going to come that nation. Now, in Matthew chapter 15, let's just look there for a second. Matthew chapter 15. We have some words that seem harsh by Christ. That seem harsh, but it's actually putting someone to the test. So we go to Matthew chapter 15, verse 21, and here is a Gentile woman who is begging for help because she knows he can help her. He knows it. Then Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon. All right, the region of Tyre and Sidon, that's a Gentile area. That's the Phoenicians up there. And behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed." She calls him Lord. Now, we could say that's just a politeness of the day. That is just addressing him as someone who has some kind of authority, or someone who just addressing him as with respect. But what she says after that is different. Son of David. Son of David. You realize there were Jews that would not call him that. That Sanhedrin court would never, ever call him that. Son of David, she knows something. There are things that have filtered down out among the Phoenicians and among the others living in the area, including the Romans. There are things that have filtered down of where they understand certain things, like that term King of the Jews, with Pilate asking Jesus, "Are you King of the Jews?" Because he would know something in saying those words. Not just, "Are you a king?" but "Are you King of the Jews?" Now the Jews had a king at that time, as Herod. And there was an emperor over Herod. And here saying, with Pilate saying King of the Jews, there's something implied by that. And her saying Son of David, there's something implied by that. And the implication is Messiah. That's the implication. That they both recognize him as either claiming to be and is the Messiah. O Son of David, have mercy. All right. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. Verse 23. Now this is, what he's going to say is going to seem harsh. What he's going to do seems harsh. But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, Send her away, for she cries out after us. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. All right, this seems harsh. Because we can see where, he healed lepers, 10 of them, and one of them happened to be a Samaritan, and he had no problem with that. He had no problem with that at all. But now here's someone being put to the test. Now she did say Son of David. Someone's going to be put to the test. He says, I didn't come but for the lost sheep of Israel. Well, that's where it comes first. That's the first audience. That's the first in this. Then she came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Now he's using an analogy here. He's using Israel as being the children and the Gentiles as being the dogs. Okay. He's using that analogy. We don't take bread away from the children and give it to the dogs. Now, this is a test to see what she would do. And she said, Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. She believes. She has called him Lord. She has called him Son of David. She said, Yes, Lord, again. Lord, help me. And now she is trying, she is insistent, she knows he can help. Now, with others, getting this kind of rebuff might make them walk away in anger. But she was insistent. She knows who she's dealing with, even though she's a Gentile. She knows who she's dealing with. And she says, yet even the dogs, they're in the house, they get food that falls from the table. And he says, then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be to you as you desire. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. Did he heal the daughter? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. But what we see in all this, he sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, yes. But there are others that are going to benefit as well. While he's doing this, there are others that can benefit because he didn't come just for the Jews. For the Jews first and also for the Greek. Welcome, Grecians. We are the Greek. We are the Gentile world, and Jesus came for us as well. He came for us, but it had to start somewhere. Now, let's go back to Romans 1 quickly, and we will look at verse 17. So we've done verse 16, not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. We have this, for in what? That gospel of Christ. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. In it, let's just put the it in it. In the gospel of Christ, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. What's the meaning of that? The meaning of that is, one, God is righteous. Number two, God's words are righteous. God's words are righteous. Number three, that God's words bring righteousness out of other people. And every time. Every time. Every time. So it doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, what you've done in your life. You apply the words of God in your life, there will be righteousness. Regardless of the lawlessness, regardless of crime, regardless of sin, regardless of anything in the past, now there can be righteousness because it works every time. It works every time. And it's from faith to faith. From person to person. From faith to faith. It works every time. From one generation to the next generation. One century to the next century. One millennium to the next millennium. It all works the same. And the righteousness of God is revealed. Show me one law of God that is wicked. Now, in today's environment, in today's insanity, everything's been turned upside down by folks. What had been known as being wicked is now good. And what had been known as good is now wicked. All right, everything's been turned upside down. But folks know when something's right. Folks know when something's wicked. And I think there's a lot of things going on now in the world. It's not just here, but in the world. I think there's a lot of things that, a lot of folks, I should say, that it's out of fear that they say what they say, and they don't agree with it. They just say what they think they're expected to say, and they don't want to have to deal with showing any kind of courage or any kind of conviction that goes against the powers that be. But here you have the righteousness of God is revealed in His words, and they are consistent, and they bring the human soul to salvation, and they bring the individual into someone who is a better individual every single time. Now in Matthew chapter 23 and verse 15, I believe it is, that Jesus speaking concerning the doctrine of the Pharisees, that you will travel land and sea to win one proselyte. And when he is won, he becomes twice the son of hell as yourself. Now we could use this Romans 1 and 17 and just rewrite it for the Pharisees. That for in it the unrighteousness of the Pharisees is revealed from faith to faith. Or the wickedness of Phariseeism is revealed from faith to faith. That every time, every new convert to Phariseeism, every new generation of Phariseeism becomes worse and worse and worse and worse. There's nothing righteous about it. Nothing righteous about it. And I don't speak of politics very much at all. I don't do it. And what I'm going to say really should not be considered political speech. But the fact of the matter is, something like Marxism and communism, not only do they fail every time, you have the naive, the hopeful, or the deceivers that they want to say, yeah, it was always done the wrong way. If it's done the right way, then it works. But it's never worked. Name the first country where there weren't massive deaths of people, where people were not murdered wholesale. Name the first one. And of course you have the backers that would say, well, that's just necessary. That's so necessary murder? Is that what we're calling for? Because then you have an ideology that will always be wicked. Always be. Let's return back to God, where this doctrine is always righteous. It from faith to faith, and it's revealed for the good that it is. And we come to these last words in verse 17. As it is written, the just shall live by faith. Now, he is quoting Habakkuk 2 and verse 4. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. We have been discussing the life of Abraham, who is regarded, he is called, not just regarded, he is called the father of the faithful. Because we see in him faith, and a profound faith in following God. From one thing after another, he follows God. And we see faith being defined by him. But he's obviously not the only one that will define true faith, true biblical faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, we have one person after another being mentioned of this person by faith did this. And they did what was required of them. They did what God called them to. And we have an understanding of what biblical faith happens to be, what it is. So just living by faith, the just shall live by faith, does that mean that I can have faith and be unjust? I can believe in God and yet be unjust? Because I know plenty of people, I do personally, that they believe in God. And I grew up with quite a number of them. They believed in God, but they weren't always so interested in law, in obeying the law, or in true justice. They never were. And I have had conversations where as long as you believe that God exists and basically that Jesus is his son, you are okay. There's nothing you can do that can take you out of salvation at that point. You're saved. You're there. Now, this tells me the just shall live by faith. So to have faith means I've got to be just. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, it's going to be by living the words of God and understanding what just is, understanding what being just is, understanding what righteousness is. Because how can the righteousness of God be revealed from faith to faith if having faith in God means you can do anything that you want to do? I can continue to murder. I can continue to be promiscuous. I can continue to be a thief. I can continue to be a liar. I can continue to be an extortioner. I can continue to be whatever. Okay? How is that righteous? How is that just? Well, it's neither one. But there's a word that must be upheld and applied. And it is the gospel of Christ. The gospel of Christ. There's a lot of folks out there that they will claim Christ, but the truth of the matter is they're ashamed of the gospel of Christ. They have to repackage it for sellability. All right? We don't have to help God. Matter of fact, don't try ever to help God. His word doesn't need help. He doesn't need a new marketing scheme. He just needs obedient hearts. That's what he wants out of us. That's what he wants. Obedient hearts. God said, Paul says that he was not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. Gospel of Christ, preaching it, put him into jail plenty of times. Preaching it sent him eventually to his own execution. Eventually, that is what happened. Eventually, Paul went through all kinds of hardships because of the gospel of Christ. Nevertheless, he was not ashamed of it. He understood that there is salvation. Salvation that had been spoken of by Moses in the law, also in the prophets, and in the Psalms, all of them testifying, all of them prophesying, all of them teaching concerning the Christ, and then all that culminates, all that is fulfilled in the life of Christ himself, bringing about, purchasing His church with His blood, and that church is the very institution that God had from everlasting for the saving of mankind. And here we are, waiting for Christ to return, doing what we have been called to do. That is what God expects. That's what He expects. And we have plenty of parables showing us of those who, while they knew Christ would return, or rather, while they knew that the Master would return, or the King would return, or the bridegroom would eventually arrive, they either were not prepared or they just did nothing except make up excuses. Let's wait for Him and serve Him to where we can stand before Him in the day of judgment, whole and clean and complete, because He's made us that way. And He's made us that way through His Word, through His sacrifice, and we must be obedient to that Word and have a proper appreciation for properly honoring that sacrifice by following those words. We ask this evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, that you come as we stand and sing.